For me, given what's at stake for us as a country, I am not still convinced about how we handled the PDS stuff. And sovereignty is not sufficient for me at all. Nobody gets fed on that in this place. So I am not one who would say, yeah, you know, we walked away from it. What's $190 million? You know, the Americans can go with their money. No, no. We deserve better answers than that. And if indeed the PDS guys were in breach of some contractual obligations, you know, and they've cost us this much money, what's the recourse? Why aren't we going after them for some recourse? I mean, if indeed they breached the contract that we had with them, whether they lied to us or in some other way, they breached the contract, and it has cost us this amount of money, $190 million explicitly, and then potentially more. Why aren't we going after them? So I think in some of these conversations, the way we cloud the issues by bringing in matters of economic nationalism and sovereignty and stuff like that, it's not, for me, a good way to get to the truth. So again, I also would want to see a lot more put on the table. And I think one of the other things I didn't like about how that whole story unfolded is the way in which we all became just spectators, right? Relying on just one-sided information from an interested party, right? What happened to the media? Why weren't we able to go behind the curtain to actually, you know, figure out what was going on? There was so much in the rumor mill in this small town, but we're all playing ostrich, as if we didn't really know or we had not heard anything. And that actually disturbs me about the way in which is of course, is also borne out by this whole Afrobarometer finding that 60% of people are afraid to report corruption if they know it. And you can tell, because a lot of stuff is in the grapevine. We hear it, you journalists hear it, we all hear it, but it's never discussed. And we then wait for the government, you know, who is allegedly complicit in the same, in these kinds of transactions, to give us their story. And then we buy that, and that's the end of story. So I think I would have expected to see a lot more on that, on the other side of the balance sheet. Show us why we should be walking away from $190 million on the table and potentially $1 billion overall. Show us why it makes sense for us from a value for money perspective for Ghana, given where we are today, given how debt-laden we are, given all the economics we are in, for us to be able to take that kind of a decision. And please don't tell me it's about economic nationalism. The other issue, I think, is the procurement authority issue. Right. There, again, here we are. When you make allegations of corruption in this country, it's usually, where is the evidence? I find that a very clever way of avoiding engagement with the issue, not because evidence doesn't matter, but corruption is the kind of thing that happens when it does. It does not happen in the open. Anti-corruption campaigners and investigative journalists are not invited in the room to observe it. So obviously the participants in the deal know that those who complain about it are unlikely to have the evidence, right? The smoking gun to prove the thing. So what was interesting about this, though, was that here you have an investigative journalist using his resources to go out and figure out, using the tools of his trade, to figure out what exactly had happened here. So it was played for all of us to observe. I think, you know, in the process, we learned a number of things. You know, how the very idea of conflict of interest is so, you know, trivialized in this society. And, you know, you cannot really deal with corruption by using the same traditional one tool in the toolkit, which is prosecution and going to court. We have used only that one tool since the Fourth Republic began. And if you were going by that tool alone, prosecution and judicializing the process, you would think there was no corruption in this country at all, because in fact, that tool has yielded very little fruit. We have probably not convicted more than a handful of people of corruption since the Fourth Republic, and yet we know that is not the full measure of the scale of corruption. So for me, things like prosecution, judicialization of the process, not that they don't matter, but they come too late at the back end of the transaction that sometimes they do not yield a lot of fruit. So what PPA told me is that we really need a lot more tools in the toolkit. Comprehensive conflict of interest rules with appropriate sanctions, right? So from the clip, initially the guy says, oh, it's my cousin. As if it's not a big deal, right? It's your cousin. And your cousin, assuming that it was even your cousin, then it changes to my brother-in-law. Assuming that you didn't even own any part of the entity. Those are conflict of interest situations. Right. That should matter. But he said, oh, and I declared it to the board. And then later the board comes, oh, yeah, there was some declaration. Trivialized. It's almost like a check the box thing. Just follow the routine, check the box. We can't fight corruption in any serious way with that kind of approach to conflicts of interest. And to be really effective, anti-corruption fight must also take account of the sociology of this place, of our society, where familiar relationships really influence a lot of decisions. We are a very close-knit, kin-related kind of society, right? So we must take things like conflict of interest seriously, otherwise we're not going to get at these kinds of relational situations that lead us into all kinds of corruption. Okay. So I really think that the handling of that, so far it's not been resolved, but I'm looking for, I'm hopeful that it will be resolved in a manner that actually protects the public purse again.
The OSP is pursuing it, and also Shraj has a petition to deal with in that regard.
I'm hoping that it would lead to something, but again, let me repeat that, not that I don't like law enforcement, prosecution, judicialization kinds of processes. I think we need more on the preventative side. Right. We need to put a lot more into conflict of interest rules that prohibit certain kinds of transactions from happening at all.